650 million years ago, climate changes triggered by the formation of the supercontinent Rodinia had left the surface of the Earth covered with a sheet of ice 1 mile thick. Temperatures hovered below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Marine organisms, the only life on the planet, had almost been wiped out. The future of life on Earth hung in the balance. But beneath the ice, the supercontinent was in turmoil. Vast volcanic eruptions were splitting Rodinia apart.
It's thought that the accumulation of heat at the base of a supercontinent is what eventually leads to its undoing. It's like putting a blanket over the Earth. The heat that's generated in the Earth's interior will accumulate underneath that blanket.
The heat would spell the end of the snowball. As Rodinia ruptured, carbon dioxide released by the eruptions created a temporary greenhouse effect. The ice sheets drew back. Rodinia had broken into giant fragments, and the icy grip on life was broken. As shallow seas opened up in Rodinia's wake and oxygen levels increased, the primitive organisms were free to take their next great step forward. They would be complex and a lot more dangerous. The Canadian Rockies. These remote mountains are home to a rare record of this key event in the evolution of life, the so-called Cambrian explosion.
For the first time in the history of life on Earth, we have some of the highest oxygen levels that we've had since the Earth was actually formed. Life bloomed, and we see animals unlike we've ever seen before.
Paleontologist Paul McNeil is hiking up to a remote mountain quarry known as the Burgess Shale. The astonishing fossils in this quarry are a window on the world as it existed over 500 million years ago.
If you surveyed all the people who study the history of life, you get almost unanimous agreement that this is one of the most important fossil sites in the world.
The man who discovered the Burgess Shale was an American, Charles Doolittle Walcott, the president of the Smithsonian Institute. This fanatical fossil hunter, who was born into poverty, had lived the American dream. Armed only with a high school diploma, he had fought his way to the top of the American scientific establishment. But it was his tenacious fossil hunting expeditions in the most remote mountains of North America that would lead to his most stunning achievement.
This is the actual location where Walcott first made his amazing discovery. As the legend goes, it was August 31st, 1909, riding along this very trail with his wife in a snowstorm. And as they were riding along, a large slab of rock came down, blocked the trail, and they couldn't get by. Now, being a gentleman, as all paleontologists are, he immediately leapt off his horse, flipped over the slab of rock, and found an incredibly well-preserved fossil. If it was down on the trail, where did it come from? Nowhere but up there.
The source of the rockfall was a section of the cliff no more than 100 feet across. A small area that became the celebrated Burgess Shale Quarry. Walcott, often aided by his own family, eventually extracted over 60,000 fossils. And since Walcott, a further 100,000 have been excavated from this uniquely rich cliff face.
Quarrying the rocks out of the mountain requires a tremendous amount of work, a lot of back-breaking labor, but it's also extremely exciting because every time you split open a rock, you never know what you're going to find. Most of the time you find nothing, but every once in a while you find a new animal, one that's never been seen before, one that's been revealed for the first time in 500 million years.
The thousands of fossils found in the Burgess Shale revealed that starting 500 million years ago, life exploded with staggering diversity and complexity.
The preservation of these fossils is actually incredible in that they're actually preserved in 3 dimensions. You can excavate through the fossils themselves, see the internal organs, remove the organs, see the digestive tract. This is fantastic preservation. Oh, look, it's starting to crack, and there goes a piece. What we have here is an actual Anomalocaris. These guys were up to 1 meter in length. That actually made them the T-Rex of the Cambrian.
In the Cambrian seas, the oxygen-rich shallow waters were teeming with complex organisms. And creatures were feeding not just on plants, but on each other.
Cambrian is actually one of the most special times in the history of life. We see more different types of animals than we see in the rest of the entire history of life on Earth.
From this time onwards, with a biological arms race driving their evolution, creatures would become increasingly complex with the development of hard shells, skeletons, eyes, and teeth. Modern animals had arrived on Earth. The high level of oxygen that had triggered this explosion of life in the seas was also making a final modification to the atmosphere. Over the next 100 million years, oxygen reached today's high levels. A level dense enough to allow an ozone layer to form in the upper atmosphere. This layer was to free life forms from the oceans. Previously, powerful ultraviolet light would destroy any organism not protected by the water. Now, the ozone layer would act as a UV shield. "400 million years ago, the Earth is more than 4 billion years old. Over the next 100 million years, the continents would once again converge. And this time, thanks to the ozone shield, life was free to leave the oceans and conquer the land. Planet Earth had become a world of tropical swamps. South Georgia, USA, the Okefenokee Swamp.
The Okefenokee is believed to be what we would call an analog, a modern analog, or an environment that's very similar to the wetlands that existed on Earth in the past.
Fred Rich is an expert on prehistoric swampland. Geologists like him believe that this freshwater swamp closely mimics the surface of the continents 300 million years ago, in a period known as the Carboniferous.
The Carboniferous was an unusual time because it was the first period in Earth history when large plants occupied Earth's surface, 40, 50, 70 feet high, that grew in dense groves and produced a vast forest canopy in a steamy tropical jungle atmosphere that was something entirely new on the face of the Earth.
This dense tropical swampland would dominate the Earth for the next 60 million years. The evidence is present on all of today's continents in the form of coal. The coal we use for fuel was formed from millions of years' worth of accumulated plant matter, most of which existed less than 300 million years ago. And it formed because of the unique way freshwater swamps decompose.
Okefenokee is derived from a Native American word that means land of the trembling earth. It's not very easy to walk through the swamp because the subsurface is soggy plant remains.
The fresh water prevents the vegetation from decaying, allowing huge amounts to build up over time.
Beneath me is not the regular sort of soil that you would have in your backyard. The soil that you see here is the plant material that accumulated last year or perhaps 5 years ago. It's leaves, stems, twigs. There's still a good bit of water in this, but if we put this under a tremendous amount of pressure and add some heat by covering over with layers of rock and leaving it in the ground for millions of years, eventually it will change to this. This is a piece of bituminous coal, and it's on the order of 200 million years old.
As the dead plants were transformed to coal on land, the shallow waters surrounding the continents were preserving millions of generations of dead marine organisms that would become our other major fossil fuels: oil and gas. Every year, mankind mines almost 5,000 megatons of coal, 30 billion barrels of oil, and 3,000 billion cubic meters of gas. This fertile period of Earth history has given us much of the energy we use today. Without it, the Industrial Revolution may never have happened. Plants were not alone in making a new life on the land 300 million years ago. As time went on, first enormous insects, then ambitious amphibians, and finally, early reptilians left the seas to take their first steps on the muddy shorelines. The U.S. East Coast back then would have teemed with monsters: 3-foot millipedes on land, 2-foot dragonflies in the air, and proto-alligators patrolling the nearby waters. The world was over 4.25 billion years old, and for the first time, the surface was host to a complete modern biosphere. But the all-conquering life forms were about to experience a hell on Earth. Forces deep within were about to give life on the surface its sternest test ever. Enormous volcanic eruptions would herald the biggest mass extinction in the planet's entire history. "250 million years